When someone wounds you, your first instinct is to react, to explain, to chase, to prove your worth, to make them understand the pain they caused. A. But that's exactly where your power begins to slip away, because the moment you start performing for someone who disrespected you, you've handed them control over your emotions, your peace, and your identity. You don't regain power by shouting louder. You regain power by standing firmer. C, confusion doesn't come from playing games. It comes from breaking patterns. If someone expects you to beg, you become still. If they expect you to argue, you become silent. If they expect you to crumble, you rise in discipline. That kind of response shakes people because they can't manipulate what they can't predict. You've got to understand something. Not every battle is meant to be fought with words. A, some battle won by how you carry yourself when you walk away. When a man hurts you, he often assumes you'll stay emotionally available while he figures himself out. But when you shift, when you stop over-explaining, when you stop reacting impulsively, when your presence becomes calm instead of chaotic, it forces him to face something he didn't expect, consequences without confrontation. That's where your strength lies. You don't need revenge. You need alignment. You need to get your mind, your values, and your self-respect back in order. Because when you're grounded, nobody else's behavior can shake your foundation. And let me tell you something powerful. Your silence can speak louder than your words ever could. Not the silence of weakness, but the silence of clarity. The silence that says, I see what this is, and I refuse to lower myself to it. You confuse him not by pretending to be someone else, but by becoming someone stronger than he ever anticipated. Someone who doesn't chase closure, but creates it. Someone who doesn't seek validation, but walks in self-worth. Because the truth is, when you stop reacting out of hurt and start responding out of strength, the dynamic shifts. Suddenly, the person who thought they had control realizes they never understood you in the first place. And that's when your power comes back. Not because you took it from them, but because you stopped giving it away. When someone hurts you, the first thing that rises up inside you is emotion. Raw, unfiltered, and intense. It hits fast and it hits deep. Your heart wants to respond immediately, to release what it feels, to make the other person understand the weight of what they've done. But in that moment, what feels natural is not always what is powerful. Because reacting in the heat of pain often leads you to say and do things that place your emotions in someone else's hands. Emotional reactions are automatic. They don't require thought, discipline, or control. They come from a place of hurt, not strength. And when you allow yourself to react instantly, you give the other person a clear map of your emotional triggers. You show them exactly what affects you, exactly what shakes you, and exactly how to reach you again. That's not power. That's exposure. Power begins when you pause, when you feel the emotion rising, but refuse to let it control your next move. Something shifts within you. That pause may feel uncomfortable, even unnatural at first, because your mind is pushing you to act. But that space between feeling and action is where strength is built. It's where you take back control of yourself. Choosing your response means you take ownership of your emotions instead of letting them own you. It means you step back, observe the situation, and decide what aligns with your self-respect rather than your pain. You're no longer reacting to them. You're responding for yourself. And that changes everything. When you respond intentionally, your words carry weight instead of chaos. You're not speaking from confusion or anger. You're speaking from clarity. And clarity is something that can't be easily manipulated. It makes your presence steady, and that steadiness becomes something others cannot easily shake. There is a discipline in holding your peace when everything inside you wants to erupt. That discipline is not weakness, it's mastery. Anyone can react, anyone can lash out, but it takes strength to remain composed when you've been disrespected. That composure sends a message without you having to say much at all. When you react emotionally, you often seek immediate relief. You want to release the tension, to say what's on your mind, to make them feel what you feel. But that relief is temporary, and it often comes with consequences. Words spoken in pain can't be taken back, and actions driven by emotion can damage your dignity. Intentional responses, on the other hand, are rooted in long-term strength. They consider not just how you feel in the moment, but who you are becoming. You begin to ask yourself, does this response reflect my values? Does it protect my peace? And when you operate from that place, your decisions begin to elevate you. Not giving someone easy access to your emotions doesn't mean you become cold or distant. It means you become guarded with purpose. You stop handing out your vulnerability to those who have shown they can't handle it with care. You learn that not everyone deserves to see your emotional depth. When you choose your response, you also choose your boundaries. You decide what behavior you will tolerate and what you will no longer entertain. And those boundaries don't always need to be spoken loudly. They are often enforced quietly through your actions and your distance. There is a certain strength in being unreadable in moments of conflict. When someone expects you to break, but you remain composed, it creates a shift in the dynamic. They can no longer predict your behavior, and without that predictability, their sense of control weakens. Emotional control doesn't mean you suppress what you feel. It means you process it in a way that doesn't harm you or diminish your value. You allow yourself to feel the hurt, but you don't let that hurt dictate your behavior. You take time to understand it before expressing it. In choosing intentional responses, you also protect your energy. Not every situation deserves your reaction. Not every person deserves your explanation. You begin to recognize that your peace is more valuable than proving a point, and that realization changes how you show up in every interaction. Over time, this practice transforms you. You become someone who is not easily shaken, not easily provoked, and not easily controlled. Your strength becomes quiet but undeniable. People may not always understand it, but they will feel it. And as you continue to respond with intention, instead of reacting with emotion, you reclaim something powerful, your sense of self. You are no longer defined by how others treat you, but by how you choose to respond. That is where true power lies. When someone becomes familiar with you, they also become familiar with your patterns. They learn how you react when you're hurt, how you respond when there's tension, and how far they can push before you respond. Over time, this creates a predictable cycle, one where they act and you react in a way they've come to expect. That predictability quietly gives them a sense of control over the dynamic. People don't always realize how much power patterns hold. If every time they pull away, you chase, they begin to rely on that response. If every time they provoke you, you argue, they become comfortable creating conflict because they already know the outcome. Your reactions stop being expressions of your feelings and start becoming part of a routine they can anticipate. Breaking that pattern is not about playing games. It's about reclaiming control over your own behavior. It's about recognizing that just because something has always happened a certain way doesn't mean it has to continue. When you become aware of the cycle, you gain the ability to interrupt it. If they expect you to chase, the strongest thing you can do is stand still, not out of pride, but out of self-respect. Chasing someone who consistently pulls away teaches them that distance will always bring you closer. But when you stop moving, you force them to confront the space they created. Stillness can feel uncomfortable, especially you're used to fixing things quickly. You may feel the urge to reach out, to close the gap, to restore what feels broken. But in that stillness, something powerful happens. You begin to separate your worth from their response. You realize that not every silence needs to be filled. If they expect arguments, choosing calm can completely shift the energy. Arguments thrive on emotional fuel. When one person brings intensity and the other refuses to match it, the dynamic changes. Calmness doesn't give them the reaction they're looking for. And without that reaction, their approach loses its effect. Remaining calm is not about suppressing your voice. It's about controlling how and when you use it. Instead of reacting in the heat of the moment, you respond with clarity. You choose words that reflect your standards, not your frustration. That kind of response is harder to dismiss and impossible to manipulate. When you break expected patterns, it creates confusion. Not because you're trying to confuse someone, but because they can no longer rely on the version of you they once understood. Their usual strategies no longer produce the same results. And that forces them to reevaluate their approach. This confusion shifts the balance of control. The person who once felt secure in predicting your behavior now faces uncertainty, and uncertainty removes their advantage. They can no longer push the same buttons because those buttons no longer trigger the same reactions. There is strength in being unpredictable in your responses, but that unpredictability must come from growth, not inconsistency. It's not about changing who you are. It's about evolving beyond reactions that once kept you stuck. Your new responses reflect your self-awareness, not instability. Breaking patterns also requires discipline. There will be moments when falling back into old habits feels easier. Reacting, chasing, arguing. It's familiar. But growth often feels uncomfortable because it asks you to act differently than you always have. That discomfort is a sign that change is happening. As you continue to break these cycles, you begin to see situations more clearly. You recognize behaviors that once went unnoticed. You become more aware of how certain dynamics were maintained and how your reactions played a role in sustaining them. This awareness empowers you to make different choices moving forward. You're no longer reacting out of habit. You're responding out of intention. And that intention allows you to create new patterns that align with your self-respect and emotional well-being. Over time, the people around you will notice the shift. Some may be confused, others may be challenged, and some even try to pull you back into old patterns. But your consistency in responding differently reinforces your growth. It shows that you are no longer operating from the same place. And in that transformation, you take back control, not by forcing change in others, but by changing how you show up. When you break the patterns they expect, you free yourself from cycles that once defined you, and you step into a space where your actions are guided by strength rather than habit. Silence is often misunderstood, especially in a world that equates loudness with strength and constant expression with confidence. When someone hurts you, there's an immediate pressure to respond, to say something, to defend yourself, or explain your feeling. But true strength is not always found in what you say. It's often revealed in what you choose not to say. When you remain silent in the face of provocation, it doesn't mean you have nothing to say. It means you have enough awareness to recognize that not every situation deserves your voice. Words are powerful, and when used carelessly or emotionally, they can weaken your position instead of strengthening it. Silence becomes control when it is intentional. It's not the silence of fear or confusion, but the silence of clarity. You understand the situation, you feel the emotion, A, but you choose not to engage in a way that diminishes your peace. That choice reflects discipline, and discipline is a form of power. Not every conflict requires a response. Some situations are designed to pull you into unnecessary drama, to provoke a reaction that feeds someone else's ego or need for control. When you refuse to participate, you remove yourself from the cycle entirely. Your silence becomes a boundary. There are moments when explanations feel necessary, A, especially when you want to be understood, A. But constantly explaining yourself to someone who has already chosen to misunderstand you becomes a form of emotional exhaustion. At some point, A, silence says, words no longer can. It says you've recognized the pattern and you're stepping away from it. Silence can carry a message that words cannot deliver. It communicates that you are no longer reacting impulsively, no longer seeking validation, and no longer trying to fix what someone else has chosen to break. It shows that you've shifted your focus inward rather than outward. When someone expects a reaction and doesn't receive one, it creates a pause in the dynamic. That pause can be unsettling for them because they no longer have control over the narrative. They can't predict your next move, and without that predictability, their influence weakens. Choosing silence requires emotional maturity. It's not easy to hold back when you feel wronged. Your mind will urge you to speak, to defend, to correct, A. But maturity allows you to ask a deeper question. Will speaking here actually change anything, A? Or will only pull me into something I've outgrown? There is a difference between silence that suppresses and silence that protects. Suppression ignores your feelings, while protection honors them without exposing them to harm. When your silence is rooted in protection, it becomes a tool for preserving your peace. Silence also gives you space to process. Instead of reacting immediately, you allow yourself time to understand what you feel and why you feel it. This space leads to clearer thinking and more intentional decisions. You're no longer acting from confusion. You're responding from awareness. In many situations, A, silence forces the other person to confront their own behavior. Without your reaction to deflect or distract, they are left alone with what they've done. This can be more powerful than any argument because it removes the noise and leaves only truth. Silence doesn't mean you accept mistreatment. It means you choose not to engage with it on a level that disrespects you. Your absence of reaction becomes a statement to you. You will not lower yourself to match behavior that does not align with your values. There is also strength in knowing that your worth is not dependent on being heard in every moment. You don't need to win every argument or have the last word. Your value remains intact whether you speak or remain silent, A. An understanding that frees you from unnecessary conflict. Over time, practicing intentional silence reshapes how you handle difficult situations. You become less reactive, more observant, and more grounded. People may not always understand your silence, but they will feel its impact. It creates a presence that is calm yet firm. And in that presence, you reclaim control over yourself. You are no longer driven by the need to respond to everything that comes your way. Instead, you move with intention, choosing when to speak and when to remain silent. That choice, made consistently, becomes a quiet but undeniable form of power. When someone fails to recognize your value, the natural instinct is to try and make them see it. You want to explain who you are, what you bring, and why you deserve better treatment. It feels like if you could just find the right words, the right tone, or the right moment, they would finally understand your worth. But the truth is, someone who has already chosen to overlook your value is not lacking information. They are lacking appreciation. The more you try to prove your worth to someone who has ignored it, the more you begin to shift from confidence into persuasion. Instead of standing firm in who you are, you start negotiating your value. You explain, justify, and sometimes even overextend yourself, hoping they will finally acknowledge what should have been obvious from the beginning. A. Worth is not something that increases the more you argue for it. In fact, constantly defending your value can make it appear uncertain. When you feel the need to repeatedly explain yourself, it sends a subtle message that your worth is up for discussion, that it can be questioned, measured, or even dismissed. There is a difference between expressing yourself and proving yourself. Expression comes from a place of self-awareness. You know who you are, and you communicate it clearly. Proving, on the other hand, comes from a place of doubt. You feel the need to convince someone else of something you should already be secure in. When someone hurts you and you respond by trying to prove your value, you often end up focusing more on their perception than your reality. You begin to measure yourself through their response, waiting for validation that may never come. That waiting keeps you emotionally tied to someone who has already shown you how they see you. Your worth does not depend on someone else's ability to recognize it. It exists independently of their opinion, their behavior, or their acknowledgement. When you truly understand that, you stop seeking approval from places that have already shown you rejection. Trying to prove your value can also lead to overcompensation. You may start doing more than necessary, giving more than you should, and tolerating more than you deserve, all in an effort to show that you are worthy of respect and care. But overextending yourself does not increase your value. It only drains your energy. When you embody your worth instead of defending it, your actions begin to reflect your standards. You no longer accept behavior that contradicts your value, and you no longer feel the need to explain why. Your boundaries become clear, not because you argue for them, but because you live by them. There is strength in walking away from situations where your value is not recognized. It doesn't mean you are giving up. It means you are choosing yourself. It means you understand that staying in a place where you are undervalued will not change how you are seen. It will only change how you see yourself. Explaining your worth repeatedly can also create emotional exhaustion. You find yourself going in circles, having the same conversations, making the same points, and receiving the same lack of understanding. That cycle can wear you down and make you question yourself, even when you were certain of your value in the beginning. When you stop explaining your worth, you create space for clarity. You begin to see people for who they are, not who you hope they will become. You recognize when someone is incapable or unwilling to meet you at the level you deserve, and you stop trying to change that reality. Your presence alone should reflect your value. The way you carry yourself, the way you treat others, and the way you set boundaries all communicate who you are without needing constant explanation. When your actions align with your self-respect, your worth becomes evident. There will always be people who fail to see your value, no matter how much you explain it. That is not a reflection of your worth. It is a reflection of their perspective, their limitations, or their choices. Not everyone is meant to understand you, and not everyone is meant to have access to you. As you begin to embody your worth, you become less reactive to how others treat you and more intentional about what you accept. You no longer chase validation because you have already given it to yourself. That shift changes how you move, how you speak, and how you respond to disrespect. And in that shift, you reclaim your power. You stop trying to prove something that was never in question. and you start living in a way that reflects who you truly are. Your worth becomes something you carry, not something you argue for, and that makes it unshakable. There comes a point where words lose their power, especially when they've been repeated too many times without change. You explain, you argue, you express how you feel, yet nothing shifts. That's when you begin to understand that words alone are not what create impact. Consistent action is. What you do repeatedly and intentionally, will always speak louder than what you say in a moment of emotion. When someone hurts you, it's natural to want to confront them with your words. You want them to understand, to acknowledge, to take responsibility. But if their behavior hasn't changed despite everything you've already said, then more words are unlikely to produce a different result. At that point, continuing to talk becomes less about clarity and more about frustration. Letting your actions replace your words doesn't mean you never speak. It means you stop relying on words as your primary tool for change. You begin to align your behavior with your standards, and that alignment sends a message that cannot be ignored or easily dismissed. Growth becomes visible when you handle situations differently than you used to. Where you once argued, you now step back. Where you once chased, you now stand still. These shifts may seem small, but they are powerful because they break the patterns that once defined your interactions. Discipline plays a major role in this transformation. It's not easy to choose action over reaction, especially when emotions are involved. A discipline requires you to stay committed to your values, even when it feels uncomfortable. It means doing what aligns with your self-respect, not what satisfies your immediate feelings. Self-respect is the foundation of meaningful action. When you truly respect yourself, your behavior reflects it naturally. You don't tolerate what disrespects you, and you don't need to constantly explain why. Your decisions, your boundaries, and your distance all communicate your standards clearly. When you elevate yourself instead of engaging in unnecessary confrontation, you shift the focus from the conflict to your growth. You stop investing energy in trying to change someone else, and you start investing in becoming stronger, calmer, and more grounded. This shift changes the dynamic in a profound way. The person who once expected arguments or emotional reactions is now faced with something different: consistency and composure. They can no longer rely on your old responses, and that forces a change in how they perceive and approach you. Actions create clarity where words often create confusion. Words can be misinterpreted, dismissed, or ignored, but actions are harder to argue with. When you consistently act in alignment with your values, there is no ambiguity about where you stand. Choosing action over words also protects your energy. Arguing, explaining, and defending yourself repeatedly can be exhausting. But when you let your actions speak, you conserve that energy and redirect it towards something more productive: your own growth and well-being. There is a quiet confidence that comes from living what you believe instead of constantly talking about it. You don't feel the need to prove your point in every situation because your life itself becomes the proof. That confidence is steady and unshakable. Over time, people begin to notice the difference. They may not always understand it, but they will feel it. Your presence becomes more grounded, your response is more measured, and your boundaries more defined. That shift commands respect without demanding it. Letting your actions lead also requires patience. Change does not always produce immediate results, and not everyone will respond the way you expect. But the goal is not to control their response. The goal is to remain true to yourself, regardless of how others behave. As you continue to grow, your actions begin to reflect a deeper level of maturity. You no longer engage in situations that drain you, A, and you no longer respond in ways that compromise your peace. Every decision becomes intentional, guided by who you are becoming rather than what you are feeling in the moment. And in that consistency, you create a new standard for yourself. You move differently, think differently, and respond differently. Your actions become a reflection of your strength, A, and that strength reshapes every interaction you have without the need for constant explanation. When someone hurts you, the desire for revenge can feel almost automatic. It rises from a place of pain, a need to balance the scales, to make them feel what you felt. In that moment, it seems justified, even necessary. But what often goes unnoticed is that the desire for revenge keeps you emotionally connected to the very thing that hurt you in the first place. Revenge creates a loop. You replay the situation in your mind, you imagine different outcomes, A, and you focus your energy on how to respond in a way that causes equal or greater impact. But in doing so, your thoughts, your time, and your emotions remain tied to that person in that moment. You may think you are gaining control, but in reality, you are staying anchored to the pain. Focusing on alignment shifts your perspective entirely. Instead of asking, how do I get even? You begin to ask, who do I need to become? That question redirects your energy inward, toward growth, clarity, and self-respect. It changes the goal from reacting to evolving. Alignment means bringing your actions, your values, and your sense of self into harmony. It means choosing behaviors that reflect who you truly are, not what the situation is trying to pull you into. When you don't need revenge to feel powerful, you feel grounded in your own identity. Revenge often promises closure, but rarely delivers it. Even if you succeed in hurting the other person, the satisfaction is temporary. The deeper issue, the pain you experienced, remains unresolved. Alignment, on the other hand, addresses that pain by strengthening your foundation rather than masking the wound. When you focus on your purpose, you begin to see that your time and energy are too valuable to be spent on retaliation. You have goals, growth, and a future that requires your attention. Revenge distracts you from that path, pulling you backward when you are meant to move forward. Peace becomes a priority when you choose alignment. Instead of feeding anger, you begin to protect your mental and emotional state. You become more selective about what you allow to affect you, and you recognize that holding on to resentment only disrupts your own stability. Self-respect plays a central role in this shift. When you respect yourself, you no longer feel the need to lower your standards to match someone else's behavior. You understand that responding with revenge places you on the same level as the action that hurt you, and you choose to rise above it instead. Letting go of revenge does not mean you excuse what happened. It means you refuse to let it define your actions moving forward. You acknowledge the hurt, but you don't allow it to control your direction. That distinction is where true strength begins to emerge. Moving forward requires intention. It means actively choosing growth over resentment, clarity over confusion, and peace over chaos. These choices may not always be easy, especially when emotions are still present, but they are necessary for long-term strength. As you shift your focus, you begin to notice how much lighter you feel. The mental weight of trying to get even starts to fade, and in its place comes a sense of control over your own life. You are no longer reacting to what happened. You are creating what comes next, Alignment also brings clarity about the people in your life. You start to recognize who supports your growth and who disrupts your peace. This awareness allows you to make decisions that protect your well-being without needing to engage in conflict. There is a quiet confidence that comes from choosing not to retaliate. It's not about being passive. It's about being purposeful. You are no longer driven by emotion, but by intention. That shift changes how you carry yourself and how others perceive you. Over time, this mindset strengthens your resilience. Situations that once triggered anger or a desire for revenge begin to lose their hold on you. You respond differently, not because the situation is less significant, but because you have become stronger. And in that strength, you discover what real power looks like. It's not found in striking back or proving a point. It's found in your ability to move forward without carrying the weight of what tried to hold you back. When people think about being unpredictable, they often associate it with playing games, acting inconsistent, sending mixed signals, or deliberately confusing someone. But that kind of unpredictability is rooted in instability, not strength. It may create short-term confusion, but it doesn't build respect or lasting power. True unpredictability comes from something much deeper. It comes from growth. When you become grounded within yourself, your behavior is no longer driven by impulse or emotion. You're not reacting the same way every time because you're not operating from the same place anymore. You've developed awareness, and that awareness allows you to pause, assess, and respond differently depending on what aligns with your values. This kind of unpredictability is powerful because it cannot be easily decoded. People who once relied on your emotional patterns, your reactions, your habits, your tendencies, begin to realize that those patterns no longer exist in the same way. You're no longer predictable in your responses, not because you're inconsistent, but because you've evolved. Discipline plays a major role in this transformation. It's the ability to stay consistent with your standards, even when your emotions are pushing you in another direction. Discipline keeps you from falling back into old habits that made you easy to read and easy to influence. When you are disciplined, your actions are intentional. You don't respond just because something happens. You respond because you've chosen to. That choice creates a layer of control that others cannot easily penetrate. They may try to provoke you, but your response is no longer automatic. Self-assurance adds another dimension to this strength. When you are confident in who you are, you don't feel the need to explain yourself constantly or seek validation from others. You move with quiet certainty, and that certainty makes your behavior less dependent on external factors. People often try to understand others by observing patterns. They look for consistency in reactions, in communication, in emotional responses. But when your consistency is rooted in your values rather than your emotions, it becomes harder for them to predict how you will respond in any given situation. This doesn't mean you become erratic or confusing for the sake of it. It means your responses are no longer based on what others expect from you. They are based on what aligns with your growth. And that shift removes the predictability that once made you easier to control. When someone cannot read you, they lose the ability to manipulate you. Manipulation relies on knowing how someone will react, knowing which emotions to trigger, and knowing how to steer the situation. But when your reactions are no longer tied to those triggers, that strategy falls apart. There is a difference between being unpredictable and being unreliable. Unpredictability through strength still maintains integrity. You remain consistent in your values, your boundaries, and your self-respect. What changes is how you express those things in different situations. As you grow, you begin to respond in ways that reflect your current mindset, not your past habits. Situations that once triggered immediate reactions now receive thoughtful responses. This shift creates a sense of uncertainty for those who expected the old version of you. This uncertainty is not something you force. It is a natural result of your evolution. You are no longer operating on autopilot. You are present, aware, and intentional. And that presence makes it difficult for others to predict or control your behavior. Over time, this kind of unpredictability builds respect. People may not always understand you, but they recognize that you are not easily influenced or swayed. Your decisions come from a place they cannot access, and that creates a boundary that doesn't need to be spoken. There is also a sense of freedom that comes with this transformation. You are no longer tied to patterns that once defined you. You are not reacting out of habit or expectation. You are choosing your path moment by moment based on who you have become. And in that freedom, you reclaim your power, not by confusing others intentionally, but by becoming so grounded, disciplined, and self-assured that no one can predict you well enough to control you. People often think unpredictability comes from playing games, changing behavior randomly, sending mixed signals, or trying to outmaneuver someone emotionally. But that kind of unpredictability is unstable, and it usually creates more confusion within you than power over the situation. Real unpredictability is not chaos. It's consistency and growth that others can't easily anticipate. When someone becomes used to you, they start to study your patterns. They learn when you react, how you respond under pressure, and what triggers your emotions. Over time, this creates a sense of predictability that they can rely on. And once someone can predict you, they can often influence or control how situations unfold. Becoming unpredictable through strength means you break those patterns, not by acting randomly, but by evolving beyond who you used to be. You begin to respond differently, not because you're trying to confuse them, but because you're no longer operating from the same emotional habits. Grounded people are hard to read because they are not easily shaken. When your emotions are stable, your reactions are measured, and your decisions are intentional, others can't rely on provoking you to get a response. That stability removes their ability to control the dynamic. Discipline is what supports this kind of transformation. It requires you to resist old habits, especially when they feel familiar. You may feel the urge to react the way you always have, but discipline allows you to pause, think, and choose a different path, one that aligns with your growth. Self-assurance plays a key role in this process. When you are secure in who you are, you don't feel the need to prove yourself, explain yourself constantly, or react to every situation. That quiet confidence makes your behavior less predictable because it is no longer driven by external triggers. When someone can't read you, it creates a shift in power. They may try the same approaches that once worked, provoking, withdrawing, or testing your boundaries. But when those methods no longer produce the expected results, their influence begins to weaken. This kind of unpredictability is not about keeping someone guessing. It's about no longer being controlled by their expectations. You are not changing your behavior to manipulate them. You are changing because you have grown beyond the version of yourself they once understood. There is strength in responding calmly when chaos is expected. There is strength in walking away when you once would have stayed. These changes may seem subtle, but they disrupt the entire dynamic because they remove the patterns that once defined the interaction. Playing games often leads to temporary control, but long-term instability. It requires constant effort to maintain an image or strategy, and it can pull you away from your authentic self. Strength-based unpredictability, on the other hand, it is sustainable because it is rooted in who you truly are becoming. As you grow, your focus shifts from trying to influence others to mastering yourself. You become more aware of your emotions, your triggers, and your responses. This self-awareness allows you to act with intention rather than impulse. People may not always understand this change. They may see your calmness as distance, your silence as indifference, or your discipline as detachment. But their interpretation does not define your reality. What matters is that you are no longer reacting from a place of weakness. Over time, your presence begins to carry a different energy. You are no longer easily drawn into conflict, no longer quick to react, and no longer predictable in the ways that once made you vulnerable. That shift creates a natural boundary that protects your peace. This transformation also builds respect, both from others and within yourself. When you know you can control your reactions and stay grounded in difficult situations, your confidence deepens. You trust yourself in a way that makes external validation less important. And in that space, you take your power back fully, not by confusing someone with tactics or games, but by becoming someone they can no longer control, predict, or manipulate. Your strength becomes your shield, your discipline becomes your guide, and your self-assurance becomes the foundation that no one else can shake.